quickly expanded to include much more. We were well into our drive with Kylie at the wheel when I watched Eamon on YouTube, clad in a blue and gray flannel jacket, in one of his many press conferences explaining that the group planned to occupy Malheur until they could unwind the claims the federal government has on this land. He then spelled out his belief that the federal government's possession and management of public lands was unconstitutional. The federal government, in his view, had exceeded its powers in its protection and management of public lands, and, because of that, the lands should be transferred or sold to states, counties, or private citizens. Eamon, in so many words, was asserting that ownership of federal public lands, iconic places like those surrounding the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Mount Rainier, Yosemite, and the Smokies, should be transferred from the federal government, and by extension from American citizens, to the highest bidder. Unfortunately, his brash and illogical reasoning didn't come as a shock. I was familiar with this ideology, now commonly referred to as the land transfer movement, from the outdoor media outlets I consumed even before the Bundys brought it to the national stage. I took umbrage with these threats, but mostly dismissed them as far-fetched. Transferring or selling our public lands, the places that millions of Americans across the country flock to every year, it seemed impossible, a radical fantasy that would be relegated to the fringe. But, as an avid hiker, hunter, angler, backpacker, and conservationist, I paid close attention. And with the Bundy standoff making headlines across the country, the rest of the nation finally was too. Unbeknownst to many, American citizens are collective co-owners of an incredible swath of land across the country. Approximately 640 million acres of it. That's roughly 28% of the total United States landmass, an area larger than Alaska, Texas, and New York combined. And this public land, from Montana to Manhattan and beyond, is available for all to use, to observe wildlife, camp, hunt, hike, fish, or bike on. But there Bundy was in my nightly newsfeed, proposing that these places should be given away or sold off to private owners. I'd learned over the preceding months that this idea, the disposal of public lands, had been proposed many times over the previous 100 years by a rotating cast of industrial-age robber baron businessmen, lobbyists, and powerful politicians. The stale argument had been resurrected again for the 21st century, but this time it was supported by both radicals like Bundy and mainstream politicians. Several years before Eamon's militia set off down Sodhouse Lane toward the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, momentum began building in Washington, D.C. to do exactly what the occupiers were now calling for. For the most part, the advocates were seen as a fringe faction, but the discourse had amassed a following under the general public's radar. Thanks to Bundy's armed standoff, CNN, the New York Times, Fox News, USA Today, and dozens, if not hundreds of other news outlets were now spotlighting this movement's demands. As I sat transfixed, watching the press conferences and reading the articles, it was obvious that the public land debate was hitting the big stage, and soon, the future of America's most cherished landscapes would be hanging in the balance. Kylie and I had driven more than 24 hours cross-country from our Michigan home straight through that empty black night, all the way to southeastern Utah and one of those very plots of public land that Bundy and his ilk were so eager to see disposed of. Despite being relatively broke 20-somethings, upon arriving in Utah, we are granted free rein and access to some of the most stunning scenery in the world. We could hike along the edge of sheer orange sherbet cliffs, raft down canyon-choked rivers, bike slick rock trails, or camp out under a canopy of winking white stars. It was all possible because men and women had long ago set space aside as public land. It's a remarkable privilege that I'd come to depend on, and that had enriched my life. But for the majority of that life, I had no idea that privilege was available to me. Growing up in Michigan, I'd hunted, hiked, fished, and visited a few state and national parks with my family. Those trips became some of the most memorable experiences of my youth. And yet, I never truly understood the breadth or scope of our public lands. I knew public land existed, but that was the extent of it. It was an unfortunate and large oversight, a 640 million acre oversight, in fact. To put that in perspective, the acreage of our federal public lands is equivalent to the entire country of Germany 7 times over. These lands provide space for hunting, fishing, and leisure activities, wildlife habitats, clean water protection, sustainable industry, and much more, all for the public. It's about as profoundly American an idea as you can find. The democratization of land and resources and